Well, we'll let the audience decide that. I want to thank Letter 22 and the conservative journalist for having me here today to speak at this forum. It's a great honor. Nothing conquers except the truth. Nothing conquers except the truth. That's the motto of the Augustinian fathers that built, created, and ran this great institution that we're in today. This library was founded in 1604, 3 years before the English came to Jamestown, to my home state in Virginia. As we heard in our introduction, some of the oldest manuscript is from the 9th century. Corpus of the books here were the basis for the Renaissance in Renaissance Rome. The Augustinian fathers were from an order founded by St. Augustine. Of all the church fathers, St. Augustine was focused most on facts, on knowledge, in the search for truth. In fact, they said you could try to perfect yourself through the pursuit of truth. St. Augustine was from Roman Africa. He was from Namibia. St. Augustine was a Berber. Most of the original members of his order around him were either Berbers or Arabs. He was from what is today modern Algeria. The Judeo-Christian West is not about ethnicity and it's not about race. We're sitting here today in one of its greatest institutions. It's been passed down to us in a half a millennium of its physical structure and over a millennium of its content. This is the unbroken chain of reason and knowledge and the pursuit of truth that has been bequeathed to us. And so when people talk about nationalism and they talk about people trying to defend the Judeo-Christian West, this is not about race, it's not about ethnicity. It's about a civilization and a culture that has been handed down and bequeathed to us. In approximately 60 days, you're going to have, I think, one of the most important elections ever in Europe. That election will, I think, define the next 10, 20, or 30 years of the direction of this continent. And at its very basic core, it's going to come down to two philosophies. One is based upon the Treaty of Westphalia and 300 years of the nation state, and the central premise that the citizen is the basic unit in a nation state. The other philosophy is personified by the European project. And that is to look at Europe as a United States of Europe, where Italy is not Italy, and France is not France, and Hungary is not Hungary. But where Italy is like South Carolina to France's North Carolina, and Hungary is Georgia to Germany's Virginia. The internal logic of the European project and the eternal logic of individuals like Macron, who has laid this out in a great level of detail, is increasing commercial integration, increasing capital markets integration, increasing budgetary integration. On the other side are Orban and Le Pen and Salvini, who understand the centrality of the nation state in the history of Europe, in the history of mankind. There are two types of politicians and political figures in Europe today. Those that see the nation state as something to be overcome, and others that see the nation state as something to be protected and polished and made better. The idea of a nation state, and particularly the value of citizenship, is centered here in Rome. It's the issue of citizenship of people in Rome versus citizenship of the people in Italy. It's the reason that Italy and Rome is more important than even its physicality and what it means to the other nations of Europe as a nation, and what it means to the world as a nation. Over a year ago, Italy voted in an election and came to a conclusion when two political parties, one a populist party that was center-left, the other more of a nationalist party that was center-right. And they tried a great experiment that had not been done in modern politics. They tried to put together a government of both the left and the right, of populist and nationalist. And when that government was put together, it put forward who they said should be the prime minister. And it was rejected by the people in Brussels and the people at the European Central Bank. In your election, almost 63 to 65% had voted for either populist or nationalist candidates. The powers that be in Brussels said the Italian people do not deserve to have their own rights to put together their own government. And so we will do what we've done for so many years in the previous decade. We will take the power back from the citizens of Italy, and we will make a decision. That collapsed within 24 hours. And you saw a government put up another potential prime minister, but said we're not going to have one forced on us. We're not going to have something rammed down our throat. Has this experiment over the last year been perfect? No. Has it gone in fits and starts? But show me another government in the world or another people in the world that would essentially come together and put forward the budget that the Italian government did, that showed the basic compromise between the two parties on the guaranteed income, the flat tax, the different economic philosophies, to work in compromise, as a democracy is supposed to do, to put forward a plan that has as much buy-in as possible from all the people. It'd be the equivalent in the United States of the Trump deplorables working with Bernie Sanders people. Yet for the second time in under a year, the financial powers that be in the party of Davos and your overlords in Brussels rejected it. It's very simple. They see Italy as an administrative unit, no matter what the happy talk is. When it comes to core central decisions, whether it's who's going to be prime minister or what your budget's going to say, they want to make the ultimate decisions, not the citizens of Italy. Pick up a random newspaper from today, the Daily Telegraph in London. The headline, May on bended knee goes to the EU. I have a lot of issues with the Prime Minister and how she's conducted these negotiations, particularly the advice President Trump gave her at the beginning, back in January of 2017. But why does a duly elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom have to go on bended knee to Barnier, to Tusk, and to Juncker? And why does an American have any interest in this at all? Before I came into President Trump's campaign, for 10 years of my life, I've been working on this populist nationalist project. Before I was a naval officer, and before I went to Harvard, and before I worked at Goldman Sachs, I came from a very humble, blue-collar, working-class family that were very devout Catholics. We were Kennedy Democrats. And I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life, and hopefully if I have another 10 and another 10 after that, to work anywhere in the world for the little guy, for the populist cause, and for economic nationalism. One of the reasons I was brought into the Trump campaign with only 88 days to go is because I had a very strong understanding of working class issues. And Donald Trump is president because working class people in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Ohio and Iowa that had never voted for a Republican candidate voted for him. Hillary Clinton, the representative of the elites, referred to them as deplorables. The elites, the party at Davos, do not think that the deplorables, whether those deplorables are in Hungary, whether those deplorables are in France, whether those deplorables are in Italy or the United States, they do not believe they should have a voice. It's upon their shoulders and their backs that these institutions are able to go forward. Since August of 17, when I left the White House, I've gone throughout the whole world, from Asia to Europe to Latin America to all over the United States, giving speeches. The audience is always the same. Humble, decent, hardworking people of every ethnicity, race, and religion. I just got back from 8 days in Japan, and I went to the United States. I spent 3 days talking about to working class people about the border, and then I went and met Bolsonaro in Brazil in Washington, D.C. In Japan, and in the heartland of our country, and with Captain Bolsonaro in Brazil, the topic was all the same. China. It just so happens today, with great irony, that President Xi happens to be here in Rome. Xi is not here because of a port on the Adriatic. He's here because of this. The Chinese have a rapacious strategy of global domination. And the concern of leaders and people from Japan to the heartland of the United States to Brazil understand this. This is not about the Chinese people. The Chinese people have their own deplorables called old hundred names. Great love for China. I've been there since 1976. I've lived in China. I have a great affinity for the Chinese people. We're live streaming right now into China with people on their private VPNs to get around the Chinese firewall. President Xi is a totalitarian dictator on the cruelest system in the world today. One Belt, One Road, Made in China 2025, and the 5G rollout of Huawei, the convergence of that will give them complete, total domination of advanced manufacturing. The concept is to absolutely break the Westphalian system. This is not me saying this. This is President Xi saying this. He went to Davos the week that Trump gave his inaugural address. And in Davos, they all worshiped him as the great savior of globalization and the globalization project. And the people in Davos, the consulting firms, the law firms, the investment banks, the commercial banks, all knew about the Uyghurs and the Dalai Lama in Tibet. And they knew about the persecution of the Christians and the persecution of the Catholic Church. They knew about all of it. They mocked and ridiculed Trump that week for defending the nation state in Washington in his inaugural address. But they worshiped him in Davos as the savior of globalization. That's because the party at Davos has no moral authority, no sense of ethics, and no common decency. And the reason is they worship one thing, and it's money. The Chinese system is to build an advanced manufacturing around China and have a network effect around One Belt, One Road, the 5G rollout, and advanced manufacturing that'll make everybody else a supplier of raw materials, a supplier of maybe some component parts, in a market. So that slaves in China can make cheap mass goods for the unemployed and underemployed in the West. Two more minutes of my favorite. 2 more minutes. Is that I find it ironic that a party that thinks so highly of the environment want to make a deal with the world's biggest polluter. Gilets jaunes is a result of having the little guy pay in taxes for Chinese pollution. Just beseech the people of Italy to look at the East India Company predatory capitalist model of China before they make a decision. And ask the people in Malaysia, in Sri Lanka, in Maldives, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and Brazil how it's turned out. I want to close by saying this is not even the biggest outrage.
E chiudo dicendo che non è neanche questo lo scandalo più grosso.
The other reason that she is here is the Vatican.
L'altra ragione per cui il presidente Xi Jinping è qui è il Vaticano.
Pope Francis has signed a secret deal with the most atheistic government on the planet. He has given a government, a radical cadre in the government of Xi and Wang Qingshan, the total control of the selection of bishops among Catholics in China. Cardinal Zen of Hong Kong, who I would posit, along with the Dalai Lama, is one of the 2 holiest men in the world. has condemned this deal as a sellout of the living saints of the underground Catholic Church in China. I'm calling on the Pope to make that deal transparent. Every Catholic, every Christian, every citizen of China, every citizen of the world should be able to read every line of that deal. And I'm going to tell you why it's secret. Because there's a path in that deal that shows a pathway to show full diplomatic relations, full diplomatic recognition between the Vatican and the Chinese Communist Party. This library was founded by one of the great orders of the Catholic Church, predicated on the search for truth and the betterment of man. And it is a total and absolute disgrace that the Pope and his henchmen have signed a deal that sells out the living saints in China today. Thank you so much for having me.
Coming back.
Thank you.
Continue a ritornare. Last year, you were here and you talked about, I can have the mic?
It works.
Thank you. Last year you were here and you talked about the most incredible experiment. You talked about Rome as being a laboratory, the center of the universe, the political universe. Are you still as optimistic as you were last year about the political experiment in Italy?
Yeah, I got it. You
For
want,
the others?
yeah. Look, I think this has been a noble experiment. This would be, and I've said it at the time, it'd be like Trump's deplorables working with Bernie Sanders people. Has it been perfect? No. Has it operated all the time smoothly? No. But I think what it showed is that people of different economic and cultural differences can compromise and try to drive our government forward. Whatever the outcome and whatever happens in the European parliamentary elections and whatever happens after that, it's been a noble experiment and I think one that's very worthwhile.
All eyes are on the European Union and the elections on May 23rd. Tutti gli occhi del mondo sono rivolti alle elezioni del 23 maggio. How are these elections, do you think, are going to unfold? Come si svilupperanno queste elezioni? E soprattutto, how are they going to change the relationship between the United States and Europe? E come queste elezioni cambieranno il rapporto fra gli Stati Uniti e l'Europa? I thought I was going to give you a little rest.
Thank you.
I think, listen, if you look at President Trump's engagement with NATO, and the mainstream media says it's been all negative, it hasn't been negative. NATO has spent over $100 billion in the last 2 years getting their defenses, getting their militaries more up to speed. President Trump's been very engaged in this. I think that the European parliamentary elections, although President Xi says all the problems are on the populist nationalist movement, and the people in Brussels say all the problems are the populist nationalist movement. If the election was held today, on data I've looked at, I think that the populist nationalist sovereignty movement could get over 50% of the European parliamentary members. And this was last summer when it was in the low 20s. So I think that you're going to have if momentum keeps as it's keeping, right? If it keeps as it's keeping, I think you could have a fundamental shift. And I believe that a party like the League may be the largest political party in the European Parliament. And a party like National Front or National Rally could be one of the second or third largest. So I think that the momentum is on the side of the sovereignty movement, the momentum's on the side of the nationalist movement, the momentum's on the side of the populist movement.
And how is that going to change relationships between us and
I
you?
think, by the way,
come cambierà il rapporto fra
strong nations, vibrant nations, robust nations based upon the shoulders of a free citizenry are even going to be closer bound. I think remember, in all my journeys throughout Europe, I haven't met a European leader that says they want to exit the EU. What they want is a different reformed EU. They don't want a United States of Europe. What they want is a confederation of individual nation states with free citizens. That is a perfect partner for the United States.
You talked about the Catholic Church, and you obviously spoke of Pope Francis. I believe 3 weeks ago, a summit on abuses was held here in Rome. You were here. C'è stato un summit sugli abusi 3 settimane fa, immagino che lei fosse qui. Are you satisfied with the Catholic Church's answer to the problem of abuses as they are unfolding in the United States? È soddisfatto con quelle che sono le risposte della Chiesa Cattolica al problema degli abusi che tutti sappiamo, siamo per la maggior parte giornalisti, stanno mandando letteralmente in bancarotta la Chiesa Cattolica americana?
The summit was a total, absolute disgrace. The topic they should have talked about is absolute 100% zero tolerance. I'm a practicing Catholic. The issue we have is we're going to see the financial liquidation of the church in North America in the next 5 or 10 years. I'm not a theologian. I'm just a practical investment banker, businessman that's worked on lots of bankruptcies. The American Catholic Church is about 70% of the free cash flow of the entire Catholic Church. The liabilities facing the Catholic Church in the United States of America are enough to put it in financial jeopardy, if not total financial liquidation in 10 years. The attorney generals in every state have already opened civil investigations, and most of them have convened grand juries for criminal charges against authorities in the Catholic Church. They're about to go after the Catholic Church in North America with the RICO statutes, which were set up to take care of the mafia and shut it down in the United States. To prove my point, last night, the diocese in West Virginia came forward because of the Attorney General and said that they had openly hired knowingly pedophiles. Summit was a disgrace because of the lack of zero tolerance of the problem and also the maturity in dealing with the financial crisis that the church is about to be hit with.
And I have one last question, really, really quickly, if you'll give us a very, very quick answer. I know you can do that. What is the most threatening presidential ticket for President Trump? And I'm talking about the Democrats. What do you think?
I think a combination right now of Kamala Harris and Beto as a ticket. But as we go on, remember, the vampire has not had a stake put in her heart. Hillary Clinton's still out there, and don't think it's not a zero probability. As they get farther into this and don't have a candidate that can take on Trump by the fall of next year, Hillary Clinton's going to be in the bullpen ready to warm up.
And do you think Trump's going to win again?
If Trump gets through the next 6 months of these investigations, that's a big if. If he gets through these 6 months of this gauntlet, he will win by more electoral votes than we won in 2016.
Allora,
A populist is someone that can listen to people on the ground?
nel senso, definitely, yes.
Look, I think populism can be very easily defined, and people that reach out to populism is that the basics of civic society, the basics, the people who teach the schools and run the civic organizations and are the police officers and the firemen and the teachers and the doctors, the basics of civic society is what politicians ought to focus on, and that is the populist movement, silent majority.
E quindi?
Yes, I think this is the point. We don't really have capitalism today. We have a neo-feudalism, right? Since the financial crash in 2008, we have this kind of neo-feudalistic society where you have very wealthy that got bailed out and very poor that are taken by some rudimentary social network, social welfare network. But the working class up to the upper reaches of almost the middle class are like 18th century Russian serfs. You're better fed, you're in better shape, you have more access to information, but you're just like Russian serfs. You don't own anything. You're not going to own anything. There's not going to be any permanent jobs. It's all going to be Amazon gig economy with no pensions, no retirements. You're like a lab rat. You're on the wheel, okay? You're on the wheel. And that's why younger generations say socialism's got to be better. You know why? This predatory capitalism that the party of Davos and the elites want to have is built the system we have today. A Russian serf with a barcode. I don't know if we can make a direct correlation with that, whether it means anything. Look, we have cultural Marxism in the left, and then we have the Party of Freedom and the Party of the traditions of the Judeo-Christian tradition. That is the two conflicting things. There's lots of progressives that are wealthy, and there's a lot of conservatives are wealthy. But particularly in the Democratic Party in the United States, up until now, they're the ones, along with the other donors, that kind of built this system. I was a naval officer on a ship that hunted Soviet submarines. Came back as a junior officer to the Pentagon during Reagan's time when we executed the war plan to destroy the Soviet Union. Russia's a kleptocracy run by bad guys. But it's an economy the size of New York State that's in a demographic and economic death spiral. The president of China, who is in Rome today, runs a radical cadre of the Chinese Communist Party that is an existential threat, not just to the West, but to every nation on earth. I think it's very important in the long term for the alliance with Japan and India and Brazil and Europe to bring in Russia. And I would hope the United States would take the lead on that, but honestly, with the hate and discontent in Washington, it's going to take decades. But that sounds brilliant. I mean, I think the future, I think populist, nationalist, traditionalist, conservative sovereignty is the right side of history. Momentum's on our side. The flow of history is on our side. It's just very basic. Can we grab the moment? Can we grab the moment and drive it forward? Oh, I think it definitely can be reformed. I think if you look at leaders like Salvini and Orban and Kurz in Austria and the Scandinavian countries, the election last night, I think if you look at this new generation of leaders that are coming up, it absolutely can be reformed and it will be reformed. So I think democracy has never been more robust. In the midterm election in 18, we had 113 million people vote. Trump lost. We lost the House. 113 million people, as robust and as dynamic as it possibly can be. Mainstream media in the United States, and I think in a lot in the United Kingdom, has been so ossified that I told Trump right after we won, they're the opposition party, not the Democrats. We've broken the Democrats. They're the opposition. And that's how it's continued today. They are the principal opposition against Trump is the mainstream media. What so amazed me about the election in Italy, even more so than the disintermediation with Trump's Twitter account, was how Di Maio and Salvini ran their campaigns. Facebook Live.
Ecco, Facebook Live, non c'è bisogno di tradurre.
And Bolsonaro focused and studied the Italian election, and he won on a budget of $750,000. In July of 2018, last July, Bolsonaro was at 15%. They studied Five Star and they studied Salvini. And the first round, they almost won the whole thing at 47% and then 55%. 100% on new media, totally disintermediated the entire mainstream media of Brazil. Trump's foreign policy is 100% different. Clinton, Bush, Obama is all essentially the same foreign policy. It's America as an imperial power with promulgating an expeditionary humanitarian force in search or in support of these global institutions. From NATO to the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea to the Northwest Pacific, we turned all four areas into protectorates and not to be allies. The international post-war rules-based order with an open security guarantee by the United States was just destined to fail. Now, whether it's NATO or the Gulf Emirates or the littoral countries around the South China Sea or South Korea and Japan. It's about having allies. So it's not this blanket American intervention everywhere, doing everything, sticking its nose in everywhere. But it's America in support of its local allies where it's in the vital national security interests of the United States. When President Trump, remember, our first foreign policy visits, and this was done for a reason, Riyadh, Jerusalem, and Rome, in that order, in the first virtual 100 days of his administration. And it was essentially to say, strategically, you've never really thought strategically. So that the radical Islamic problem, the problem with Iran, and the problem in Palestine are all of equal importance. You've got to prioritize the problem. The number one problem is the exportation and the financing of radical Islamic terrorism. This problem is centered around the Persian Gulf. Now, I would actually argue that Qatar is the bigger problem, but there was a serious discussion with all partners there that this has to cease, and there has to be mechanisms, there has to be agreements, there has to be understandings that this is a problem because now it's a problem in the Gulf region. But I agree with you 100%. Before you get the support against Persian expansionism, you have to stop 100% of the financing of the exporting of radical Islamic terrorism. I don't think Macron has, I think Macron's approval rating is still in the low 20s. It's come back, but it's in the low 20s. It's under 25%. That's not 1 point higher than the first round of the French elections. He hasn't moved at all. He's been totally flatlined to down. In September of 17, Macron laid out the whole program, further capital markets integration, further commercial integration, further military integration, further budgetary integration, for the Franco-German project. Macron has gotten no support whatsoever from the first round of the voting. And I certainly don't approve of the violence of the Gilets jaunes. But if you keep putting the burden for Chinese pollution on working class people in France, that's what you're going to get. First you take their jobs, ship them to Asia, then you make them pay for the pollution of that. Also, the City of London and Wall Street can make more money financing it. Well, first off, I propose that we stop whining and start trying to educate young people. We're in a great institution of rational scientific thought. The environmental movement that those young people are backing is a new religion. It's a theology, not about science, it's about theology. At the same time, we haven't held corporations and banks and our elites to have a real form of capitalism, not this neo-feudalism. So is it any surprise that young people both are attracted to socialism and attracted to these wild ideas on climate change? No. Because we haven't, as conservatives, contested it in the marketplace of ideas. And I think that's got to be a very high priority. That flag would be the flag of each nation. You don't need, as each nation has its own culture, its own way of doing things, its own outlook on life, and it's based upon its free citizens. That robust nationalism, that patriotism, that free citizenry, it's that flag of each country that'll be its symbol.
Mr. Bannon, Trump, as you pointed out, you talked about the little guy and defending the little guy and economic populism. And Trump ran on that and promised to improve health care for everyone, defend the little guy. But the economic policy of the tax cut was heavily skewed toward the wealthy, and he's arguably done a lot of things to make it easier for what you call the elites of Davos. Do you feel he's lived up to his promise of economic populism for the little guy, or gone against that?
It's a great question. It's a great question. But remember, we won as a coalition. I reached out immediately to the Republican establishment, the RNC, to come on board in mid-August when we were down by 12 points, 14 points. We could not have won without the Republican establishment. And as any Faustian bargain that you end up making, there's payments for that. As you've seen in the press the last couple of days, we had a deal on health care that I didn't think was great, but was livable. John McCain, whose Trump's endorsement allowed him to get back to the United States Senate, because without his endorsement, McCain would have been beaten in Arizona. McCain, after running on repealing and replacing Obamacare and promising us all the way through he was going to vote for it, came back and at 2 o'clock in the morning, 2 a.m., shifted his vote and put the knife in Trump.
Ha cambiato il voto e di fatto ha pugnalato Trump alle spalle.
On a personal vendetta. And Obamacare was not repealed or replaced because of one vote in the United States Senate.
Senato.
On the taxes, I argued in the Oval Office for a 44% tax on every individual that made more than $5 million for the hedge funds in Silicon Valley and Hollywood. That would have broken the back of the Democratic Party. Bernie and them would have nothing to run on. It was shot down by two progressive Democrats that are in the Trump administration. Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin. Gary Cohn, the National Economic Advisor, and Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, both progressive Democrats. The corporate taxes were the biggest part of it and had to be done, and that's populist because it makes you competitive with China and Germany and starts to bring manufacturing jobs back to the heart of the country. So it's just like how you're trying to govern here. It's not perfect, but it's a process. And I think he's having more wins than defeats, and I think he's getting more populist and more economic nationalist every day he goes on. I think it's the reason that we picked the sequence we picked when we went to Riyadh, Jerusalem, and to Rome. I mean, it's Athens, Jerusalem, Rome, London, Washington. That's the core of the Judeo-Christian West, and Jerusalem is an absolute central part of that. It's a central part of our traditions, a central part of our laws. It's a central part of our customs and traditions. So yes, if the question is the defense of the Judeo-Christian West on the walls of Jerusalem, I think absolutely. And I think that goes back for millennia, and it'll go forward to the millennia in the future. Of your point, is it subjective? All I know is what I see, and I know working class people and middle class people. Economic nationalism is what binds people together. It doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, your color, your gender, your sexual preference. It matters that you're a citizen of that country, whether that country's Italy or the United States of America. It's the reason they're so shocked in the United States that now Trump's approval ratings among Hispanics are starting to rise. And the reason is wages are starting to rise since Trump's put in these tough measures against mass illegal immigration. African-American unemployment, historic all-time low. Hispanic, 40-year low. Wages are starting to rise. So from that perspective, the economic determinism, I see the economic results, and I think you're now starting to see the political results. You know, it's a great question. When Marine Le Pen asked me to come and speak last year at the Front National annual conference, I said, what do you need me to come over? I'm an American. What could I talk about? She said, just tell us we're not alone. I have not talked to one populist, nationalist, political figure in Europe that didn't know 100 times more than I did about how to run local elections, national elections, how to win office. I'm not a professional political operative. I volunteered for Trump's. I had never been in a campaign office in my life before I walked in and took over Trump's campaign.
Trump.
Not even for a city councilman. And today, I never took a penny from Trump, and I've never taken a penny from any political figure I've ever talked to. So none of my discussions have ever been what they have to do nationally or locally, because they understand that 100 times better than I do. I just give them a chance to know that they talk to the devil. Salvini never needed me. The politicians here don't need me. They are fully capable of winning elections on their own. In fact, the reason the party of Davos that's headquartered in Brussels is so afraid has nothing to do with me. Because you have great rising stars like Salvini and Orban and Kurz and others throughout Europe. And you have a citizenry that's tired of going on bended knee to Brussels. That's what their fear is. Because the populist, nationalist sovereignty movement has great politicians, a great message, and now it has traction. And that's why it's on the cusp, maybe, if the momentum keeps, through Spain and other nations, a stunning victory in May.
Information about what the citizens think.
There's two things on data I think that we have to understand. The first, and I have argued this for a couple of years, Facebook and Google and these big distribution methodologies have to be treated as public utilities and they have to be regulated. All the data has to be dropped down into a public trust. And you as an individual generator of that data have to opt into the system. We'll have price discovery on how you pay for Facebook and pay for Google because they will no longer be free. And you will be the recipient of that transaction. But every bit as important is Huawei. Huawei is an arm of the People's Liberation Army of China. Let me repeat that. It's not associated with, it's not a partner with, it doesn't know them. It is a branch of the People's Liberation Army of China. 5G is not a linear progression from 4G. 5G is to the 10th order of magnitude different than 4G. It is the basis of all quantum computing and the basis of all future technological development. The 5G system data is like plutonium, and it can and it will be weaponized. Every telecommunications company that uses Huawei as a backbone, every system like in Turkey that has Huawei run its telecom system, is essentially having the People's Liberation of China run your telecom. Don't believe me. This comes from 2 Chinese colonels in the People's Liberation Army. This book was published in 1999. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. It says there's 3 types of warfare: information, economic, and kinetic. We can never fight the West with kinetic arms, but we can overwhelm and eventually destroy the West with information technology and economic war. And Huawei is a Trojan horse in the West to get your data and to eventually weaponize it. The single most important event in the economic war of the West against China, which China has been in economic war with us for 25 years, was the arrest in Canada of the chief financial officer of Huawei. Canada.
In Canada.
The least aggressive nation on earth. Nicest people on earth. Do not believe for a second that it was because of sanctions against Iran. She's the key that picks the lock. And I look forward to the day she's extradited to the United States and stands trial. I hope one of the politicians that are with Xi the next couple of days asking a question about Huawei.